I never planned to tell this story publicly, and for a long time I promised myself I never would. Some experiences feel too personal, too tightly knotted into who you are and what you had to become just to survive them. They're the kind of memories you tuck away and only revisit late at night. When the house is quiet, the world feels far away, and no one's asking questions you don't yet know how to answer. But the older I get, the more I understand something important. Some chapters don't really close until you say them out loud, all the way through, without skipping the uncomfortable parts or sanding down the rough edges to make them easier for other people to hear. For me, it always begins with the same image. Early morning, before the day has fully decided what it's going to be. The air is cool, the kind that fills your lungs and reminds you you're alive. I step out onto my porch with a mug of coffee that's already gone lukewarm because I forgot about it while staring out at the land. I look toward the western edge of my property, and in my mind I still see it as clearly as if it were happening again. A white luxury SUV sitting half buried in the mud, tilted at an awkward angle, silent, helpless, finally still. And what surprises me every single time is that I don't feel proud. I don't feel smug. I don't even feel victorious. What I feel is calm, deep, steady calm. Like something that had been grinding inside my chest for months, maybe years, finally stopped turning. Like my body finally understood that the fight was over. But stories like this don't start at the ending. They start long before anyone ever crosses a line. A few years back, my life couldn't have looked more different. I was living in Chicago, working logistics management for a national distribution company. On paper, it was a good life. Solid paycheck, benefits, a job title people nodded at like it meant stability and success. I was the guy people called when a process was broken and no one could figure out why. I could walk into a mess of spreadsheets, missed deadlines, and angry emails and see the entire system laid out in my head, where it clogged, where it leaked money, where one small adjustment could save weeks of time and thousands of dollars. People used to tell me I had a gift for seeing how things fit together. What they didn't see was how tired I was. Bone-deep tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. My phone buzzing at midnight felt normal. Eating dinner at my desk felt normal. Measuring my weeks by deadlines instead of daylight felt normal. Somewhere along the way, normal stopped meaning healthy, and I didn't even notice when that line blurred. I stopped asking myself if I was happy and started asking only if things were under control. One night, I was sitting alone in a break room under flickering fluorescent lights, staring into a cup of coffee that tasted like cardboard and regret, and a thought landed in my head so clearly it felt like someone else had spoken it aloud. If this is the rest of my life, I don't want it. That thought didn't go away. It followed me home. It followed me into meetings. It sat next to me in traffic. It showed up when my alarm went off and when I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling. And instead of shoving it down like I always had, instead of telling myself to be grateful and quiet, I finally listened. I saved aggressively. I sold most of what I owned. I downsized my life until it fit in the back of a rented truck. Furniture, clothes, books, things I'd once convinced myself I needed torrid, gone. I started looking for land. Not a vacation place. Not a hobby farm. Real land. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere where work ended when the sun went down and nobody expected anything from you after dark. That's how I found the farm. 65 acres just outside a planned community called Brookhaven Ridge. Rolling pasture that dipped and rose like it had its own rhythm. A narrow creek cutting through one corner, slow and stubborn, like it had nowhere else it needed to be. An old barn, leaning slightly to one side, scarred and weathered, like it had survived a few hard decades and didn't feel the need to apologize for it. And one detail that felt almost poetic at the time, the property sat completely cleanly, legally outside the HOA boundary. That thin line on the county map felt like freedom. I didn't know then how much that line would end up defining my life. The first few years were everything I hoped for and more. I fixed fences with my own hands, learned how to curse creatively when barbed wire snapped back at me. I raised cattle and learned their personalities. Which ones were curious, which ones were stubborn, which ones needed extra patience and a softer voice. I planted corn and soybeans and learned to read the sky the way you read a book you respect. Slowly, carefully, knowing it doesn't give up its meaning all at once. I woke up sore and went to bed tired in the best way possible. I traded spreadsheets for dirt, conference calls for birdsong, deadlines for daylight. I knew the HOA neighborhood was close. Rows of identical houses and polished driveways, but we existed in parallel worlds. Occasionally I'd see someone jogging along the road or walking a dog, and we'd nod at each other. Nothing more. I didn't bother them. They didn't bother me. That quiet coexistence felt solid. Permanent, like something I could rely on. It wasn't. The first time I encountered Vanessa, I didn't even know her name. I was out by the barn tightening a hinge when I heard an engine that didn't belong on farmland. Smooth, expensive, confident. The kind of sound that assumes the road ahead is meant for it. I looked up just in time to see a white SUV roll down my private gravel drive like it had a reservation, then turn straight into my field. At first, I waved, assuming she was lost. She didn't wave back. She drove straight through young corn and parked like she'd arrived at a country club. I walked over, calm and polite, and told her this was private property. She laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd just told her a joke. Then she locked her car and said, "Relax, this is community access. We've always parked here." When I explained that the land was mine, deeded and documented, she tilted her sunglasses down, looked at me like I'd missed an obvious memo, and said, "Oh, you must be new." Then she walked past me without waiting for a response. That moment didn't make me angry right away. It unsettled me. Because she wasn't confused, she wasn't mistaken. She genuinely believed confidence could overwrite reality. That if she said it with enough certainty, the world would rearrange itself to agree with her. 2 days later, she came back. Same path, same spot. More damage. Then again and again. Soon she wasn't easing in anymore. She was flying across the field, honking, laughing, treating my land like a shortcut. Other vehicles followed her lead. Minivans, sedans, a pickup or two. People waving at me like I was part of the scenery. Like my land was a convenience instead of a livelihood. I tried to handle it the right way. I put up signs, big ones, clear ones. PREV, property. No trespassing. She drove past them. I added more signs. She ignored those too. I installed cameras. I documented everything. Photos, videos, dates, times. Tire tracks cutting through soil I'd spent years nurturing. Every new rut felt like a small insult layered on top of the last. I sent a formal cease and desist letter through my lawyer. She shredded it and scattered the pieces in my field like confetti. When the sheriff showed up after she accused me of threatening her, I calmly handed over months of footage, timestamps, GPS data. He sided with the law, but before he left, he looked at me and said quietly, "Some people don't stop when they're told no." The tension started seeping into everything. I'd wake up and check the field before I checked the weather. I'd hear an engine in the distance and feel my chest tighten. I started timing my days around her patterns without even realizing it. The land didn't feel like a refuge anymore. It felt contested. And that eats at you in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived on land you love. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky feels heavy and low. Vanessa tore across the field faster than usual, too close to my cattle. One of my cows, pregnant and gentle, panicked and slipped. She went down hard. That night she miscarried. I sat in the barn until sunrise, listening to her breathe, watching the straw shift beneath her, feeling anger give way to something colder and heavier. This wasn't inconvenience. This wasn't disrespect. This was harm, and the hardest part was knowing Vanessa would never feel it the way I did. To her, it was just another drive. Another laugh, another story to tell her friends. That was the moment something in me settled. I stopped trying to persuade her. I stopped hoping she'd suddenly develop empathy. I started thinking like an engineer again. When conversation fails, you don't argue harder. You redesign the system. Carefully. Legally. I called my lawyer and laid out the idea without emotion. A gravity-assisted tilting platform at the edge of my property. No motors. No force. No surprises. Just physics. Doing what physics does when weight crosses a threshold. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "If it's clearly marked, non-lethal, and fully documented, it's legal. Just don't call it a trap." So I built it. Slowly, methodically. I tested it with hay bales. Then with an old farm truck I didn't care about. I adjusted angles, measured tolerances. I overdid the warnings, bright signs, clear language, multiple angles. I photographed everything, filed reports, even notified the county and the sheriff's office. And because I knew exactly who I was dealing with, I added one final sign on the platform itself. Clean. Tempting. Reserved parking. Authorized only. Then I waited. 4 days passed. On the 5th morning, right on schedule, Vanessa showed up. Sunglasses on, music loud. She slowed, just enough to read the sign, and smiled. Didn't hesitate. Drove straight onto the platform. I warned her through a megaphone, calm and clear, giving her every chance to back out. She laughed and yelled, "Do it." So I did. The platform tilted. The SUV slid back smoothly, almost gracefully, like gravity itself had been waiting patiently for its turn, and settled into the mud trench with a heavy, wet silence. No crash. No chaos. Just consequence. When the sheriff arrived, he watched the footage, walked the site, read the signs, and finally looked at me and said, "Well, gravity isn't illegal." Vanessa was cited for trespassing and damages. Her insurance denied the claim. A week later, the HOA quietly removed her from the board. What surprised me most came afterward. The silence. No more engines, no more shortcuts. Neighbors from the HOA started waving differently, slower, more cautious. A few even stopped by to apologize, quietly, awkwardly, like they hadn't realized how far things had gone or how much damage entitlement can do when no one challenges it. Now, in the evenings, I sit on the porch and watch the sun slide down behind the trees. I listen to the cattle settle. I feel the weight in my chest finally ease. And sometimes I wonder how many people live their entire lives letting lines blur, letting small trespasses become habits. Habits become expectations. Expectations become entitlement, until someone finally says enough. So here's what I want to ask you. Where do you draw the line? When does patience become permission? And when does protecting what's yours become the only option left? Tell me what you think in the comments. Not because there's a right answer, but because stories like this don't just test boundaries. They reveal who we are when those boundaries are pushed.